The doorbell chimed, slicing through the quiet of my apartment like a knife through silk. I froze, my hand hovering over a half-empty coffee mug, the steam curling upward like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Who delivers groceries at 8 p.m. on a rainy Brooklyn evening? I shuffled to the door, my socks slipping slightly on the hardwood floor, and peered through the peephole. A guy stood there, maybe mid-20s, his dark hair damp from the drizzle, clinging to a grocery bag like it was his lifeline. His delivery jacket was frayed at the cuffs, and his eyes, God, those eyes, held a flicker of something I couldn't place. Hesitation? Hope. I opened the door, the cold air rushing in, and he looked up, startled, like he hadn't expected me to answer. Grocery delivery for Elias Carter? His voice was soft but steady, with a faint southern drawl that didn't belong in Brooklyn. That's me, I said, taking the bag. Our fingers brushed, just for a second, and I felt a jolt, like static but warmer. He didn't move, just stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Mind if I come in for a sec? He asked, so quietly I almost missed it. My heart stuttered. A stranger, a delivery guy, asking to step into my world? Every rational part of me screamed to say no, but there was something in his gaze, raw, unguarded, that made me pause. I just need a minute out of the rain, he added, glancing at the downpour behind him. His name tag read Jasper. No last name, just Jasper, like he was a character in a story I hadn't started reading yet. I should have said no. I should have handed him a tip and closed the door. But instead, I stepped aside and said, "Sure, come in." The apartment felt smaller with him in it. Jasper stood just inside the doorway, dripping slightly onto the welcome mat, his eyes scanning the room like he was memorizing it. My place wasn't much: a second-hand couch, a bookshelf stuffed with dog-eared novels, and a single lamp casting a warm glow. But the way he looked at it made it feel like a stage set for something bigger. "You live alone?" he asked, not in a creepy way, but like he was genuinely curious. His accent curled around the words, making them sound softer than they should have. "Yeah," I said, setting the grocery bag on the counter. "Just me and my questionable cooking skills." I meant it as a joke, but he smiled, a small, lopsided thing that made my chest tighten. He didn't say anything for a moment, just rubbed the back of his neck, his fingers leaving a faint trail of rainwater on his skin. "I'm not usually this forward," he said finally. "Asking to come in, I mean. It's just been a long day." I nodded, not sure what to say. I wasn't used to strangers lingering in my space, let alone ones who looked like they were carrying a story they weren't ready to tell. "Want some coffee?" I asked, mostly to fill the silence. His eyes lit up, just a fraction. If it's not too much trouble. I busied myself with the coffee maker, hyper-aware of his presence behind me. The rain pattered against the windows, a steady rhythm that matched the thud of my pulse. Who was this guy? Why was he still here? And why did I want him to stay? "So, Jasper," I said, handing him a mug, "what's a southern boy doing delivering groceries in Brooklyn?" He laughed, a low, warm sound that felt like it belonged in a different life. "Trying to figure that out myself," he said, taking a sip. "Moved here a few months ago. Thought I'd find something. Not sure what yet." "Something," I echoed, leaning against the counter. "That's specific." He grinned, and for a moment, the room felt brighter. "Yeah, well, I'm a work in progress." We talked for longer than I expected. Jasper told me about growing up in a small Georgia town, where everyone knew everyone and secrets were currency. He didn't say much about why he left, but there was a weight to his words, like he was carrying something heavy just beneath the surface. I told him about my job at the community center, teaching art to kids who'd rather be on their phones, and how I'd moved to Brooklyn to escape my own small-town past in Ohio. "You're an artist?" he asked, glancing at the sketches pinned to my fridge, half-finished portraits of people I'd never met. "Trying to be," I said. "Mostly I just doodle and hope it means something someday." He nodded, like he understood more than he was letting on. "I used to write," he said quietly. "Nothing fancy, just stories. Haven't in a while, though." "Why'd you stop?" I asked, genuinely curious. His smile faded just for a second. Life got in the way. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time he finished his coffee. I expected him to leave, to thank me, and disappear back into the night. But he lingered, his fingers tracing the rim of the mug. Elias, he said, my name sounding different in his voice, like it carried weight. Can I ask you something? My stomach flipped. Sure. Have you ever felt like you were running from something, but you didn't know what it was? I stared at him, caught off guard. It was the kind of question that stripped you bare, the kind you didn't ask a stranger unless you were desperate for an answer. Yeah, I said after a moment. All the time. He nodded, like that was enough. But it wasn't. Not for me. Because in that moment, I realized I wanted to know everything about Jasper, who he was, what he was running from, and why of all the doors in Brooklyn he knocked on mine. The next morning, I woke up with Jasper's question still echoing in my head. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he'd looked at me, like he was searching for something I didn't even know I had. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the grocery bag he'd left behind, now neatly unpacked, its contents a quiet reminder of last night's strange, fleeting connection. I didn't expect to see him again. Brooklyn was big, and delivery guys were transient, flitting from door to door like ghosts. But as I walked to the community center, my sketchbook tucked under my arm, I caught myself scanning the streets, half hoping to spot a frayed delivery jacket in the crowd. The center was alive with its usual chaos, kids shouting, paint splattering, and the hum of a city that never slowed down. I was setting up for my afternoon class when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. My heart did a weird little flip as I opened the message. Hey, it's Jasper. Got your number from the delivery app. Hope that's okay. Thanks for the coffee last night. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Why was he texting me? And why did it feel like the most important thing that had happened all week? No problem, I typed back. Glad you got out of the rain. A minute later, another buzz. You free tonight? I owe you for the hospitality. I should have said no. I had papers to grade, sketches to finish, a life to keep in order. But instead, I wrote, sure. Same place? Jasper showed up at 7 p.m., this time without a grocery bag or a delivery jacket. He wore a faded green sweater that brought out the hazel in his eyes, and his hair was dry, curling slightly at the ends. He looked different, less like a stranger, more like someone I'd known for years. Figured I'd bring something, he said, holding up a bottle of cheap wine. It's not fancy, but neither am I. I laughed, taking the bottle. You're in good company then. We sat on the couch, the wine bottle between us, and talked like we'd never stopped. He told me about the odd jobs he'd picked up since moving to Brooklyn, delivery, bartending, even a brief stint as a dog walker that ended when a Great Dane dragged him through a park. I told him about the time I tried to paint a mural for the community center and ended up with more paint on myself than the wall. But beneath the easy banter, there was something unspoken, something that made the air feel charged. Every time our eyes met, it was like we were teetering on the edge of a question neither of us was ready to ask. So, I said, pouring another glass of wine, you never told me what you're running from. He froze, just for a second, his fingers tightening around his glass. You don't pull punches, do you? Not when I'm curious, I said, trying to keep my tone light. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling like it held the answers. It's not one thing, he said finally. It's a lot of things. My family mostly. They had ideas about who I should be, and I didn't fit the mold. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. Small towns can be brutal like that. Yeah, he said, his voice softer now. They love you, but it's conditional. You step out of line, and suddenly you're the outsider. I wanted to ask more, what line he'd stepped over, what had pushed him to leave everything behind, but something in his expression told me to wait. Instead, I said, you're not an outsider here. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment, the room felt too small, too warm. You don't even know me, Elias. Maybe not, I said, but I want to. The night stretched on, the wine bottle emptying as the conversation deepened. Jasper told me about the stories he used to write. Fantasies about people who could be whoever they wanted, no matter what the world thought. I showed him my sketches, the ones I never shared with anyone, and he traced his fingers over the lines like they were a map to somewhere he'd been. When he finally stood to leave, the clock read midnight. The rain had started again, a soft patter against the windows. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move toward the door. "You don't have to," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He hesitated, then smiled, that same lopsided smile that made my chest ache. "Maybe next time," he said. "I don't want to wear out my welcome." "You're not," I said too quickly. "I mean, you're welcome here. Anytime." He nodded, like he was filing that away, and then he was gone, disappearing into the rain like a dream I wasn't sure I'd had. But as I closed the door, my phone buzzed again. "Good night, Elias. Thanks for making me feel like I belong somewhere." I stared at the message, my heart pounding. This wasn't just a delivery guy. This was something else, something that scared me as much as it thrilled me. And I had no idea where it was going to take us. Days turned into weeks, and Jasper became a fixture in my life, like a song I couldn't stop humming. He'd show up after his delivery shifts, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing but that quiet smile that made my apartment feel like home. We'd talk for hours, about art, about stories, about the lives we wanted but weren't sure we deserved. But there was always a line we didn't cross, a space between us filled with unspoken questions. I could feel it in the way he'd pause before answering, the way his eyes would flicker away when I got too close to something real. He was holding back, and I didn't know why. One evening, we decided to venture out, trading the safety of my apartment for a dive bar in Williamsburg. The place was packed, all neon lights and sticky floors, the kind of spot where secrets got drowned in cheap beer. Jasper seemed nervous, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the table. "You okay?" I asked, sliding him a beer. He nodded, but his eyes were elsewhere, scanning the crowd like he was expecting trouble. "Just not used to places like this," he said. "Back home, I get looks if I went somewhere like this." "Looks?" I raised an eyebrow. "What kind?" He took a long sip of his beer, like he was buying time. "The kind that say you don't belong," he said finally. "The kind that make you feel like you're doing something wrong just by existing." My stomach twisted. I'd felt those looks before, growing up in Ohio, where being openly bi meant walking a tightrope between acceptance and judgment. "You don't have to worry about that here," I said. "Brooklyn's different." "Is it?" he asked, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Because sometimes it feels like the whole world's watching, waiting for you to slip up." I wanted to reach for his hand, to tell him he wasn't alone, but the bar was loud, and the moment felt too fragile. Instead, I leaned closer. "You're not slipping up with me." He looked at me, his expression softening, and for a second, I thought he might say something that would change everything. But then someone bumped into our table, spilling beer everywhere, and the moment was gone. Later, as we walked back to my place, the city buzzing around us, Jasper was quieter than usual. The air was crisp, the streets slick with recent rain, and I could feel the weight of whatever he wasn't saying. "Jasper," I said, stopping under a streetlight. "What's going on? You've been off all night." He shoved his hands in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "This whatever this is. With you." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "What do you mean?" He looked away, his jaw tight. I've never let myself get close to someone like this. Not a guy. Not anyone, really." The words hit me like a punch. I'd suspected, from the way he talked about his family, his hometown, that there was something he wasn't saying. But hearing it out loud, that he was grappling with who he was, with what he wanted, made it real. "You don't have to have it all figured out," I said softly. "Not with me." He met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw fear there, raw, unguarded fear. "What if I mess this up?" he asked. "What if I'm not enough?" I stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of him despite the cold. "You're enough," I said, "just as you are." He didn't say anything, but he didn't pull away either. And as we stood there, under the glow of the streetlight, I realized this was the moment. the one where everything could change or everything could break. The weeks that followed were a blur of moments, small, fragile, and impossibly bright. Jasper started coming over almost every night, sometimes with a new story idea scribbled on a napkin, sometimes with nothing but a tired smile. We'd cook terrible dinners together, laugh at our failures, and fall into conversations that stretched past midnight. But every time I thought we were getting closer, he'd pull back, like he was afraid of what might happen if he let go. One night, we were sprawled on my couch, a half-eaten pizza between us, when he pulled out a notebook. "I wrote something," he said, his voice hesitant. "It's not much, but I wanted you to see it." He handed me the notebook, and I opened it to a page filled with his neat, slanted handwriting. It was a short story about a boy who loved someone he wasn't supposed to in a town that wouldn't let him forget it. The words were raw, aching, and so clearly Jasper that I felt my throat tighten. "This is beautiful," I said, looking up at him. "You should keep writing." He shrugged, but his eyes were bright. "I don't know. It's hard to write when you're still figuring out your own story." I set the notebook down, my heart pounding. "What's your story, Jasper?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for my hand, his fingers trembling slightly as they laced through mine. I think you're part of it," he said, so quietly I almost missed it. My breath caught. I wanted to hear those words, but now that they were here, they felt huge, overwhelming. "Jasper," I started, but he shook his head. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I've spent my whole life hiding who I am. My family, my town, they made it clear what happens when you don't fit in. But with you, I don't want to hide anymore." I squeezed his hand, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "You don't have to. Not with me." He leaned closer, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me. But then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He glanced at the screen, and his face changed, pale, tense, like he'd seen a ghost. "What is it?" I asked. "It's my brother," he said, his voice tight. "He's in town. He wants to see me." The next day, Jasper was different, distant, like he'd retreated into himself. He told me his brother, Caleb, was staying in a motel nearby, and they were meeting for dinner. "He's the only one from my family who still talks to me," Jasper said, but there was no warmth in his voice. "I don't know what he wants." "Do you want me to come with you?" I asked, half expecting him to say no. He looked at me, surprised, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." We met Caleb at a diner in Greenpoint, a greasy spoon with flickering fluorescent lights and cracked vinyl booths. Caleb was older than Jasper, broader, with the same hazel eyes, but none of the warmth. He barely acknowledged me, his focus locked on Jasper like he was sizing him up. "You look different," Caleb said, his voice clipped. "City's changing you." Jasper shrugged, his fingers fidgeting with a napkin. "Maybe. What do you want, Caleb?" Caleb leaned forward, his voice low. "I came to bring you home. Ma's sick, Jasper. She's asking for you." Jasper's face went still, like the air had been sucked out of the room. "She didn't want me there when I left," he said. "Why now?" "She's family," Caleb said, like it was that simple. "You don't turn your back on family." I wanted to say something to defend Jasper, but the look in his eyes stopped me. This wasn't my fight. Not yet. But as I watched him struggle, caught between the life he'd left and the one he was trying to build, I knew I couldn't let him face it alone. Jasper didn't talk much after the diner. We walked back to my apartment in silence, the city's noise filling the space between us. I could see the weight of Caleb's words pressing down on him, pulling him back to a place he'd fought so hard to escape. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked once we were inside, the door clicking shut behind us. He shook his head, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. "I don't know what to do, Elias. My mom, she's the reason I left. Her and my dad, they didn't want me. Not the real me." I sat on the couch, watching him, wishing I could take away the pain in his voice. "What happened?" I asked softly. He stopped pacing, his hands clenched into fists. "I told them I was gay," he said, the words spilling out like they'd been trapped for years. "I was 17. They didn't kick me out. Not exactly. but they made it clear I wasn't welcome unless I fixed myself. So I left. My heart ached for him, for the boy who'd had to run just to be himself. "You don't need fixing," I said. "You never did." He looked at me, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "Then why does it still hurt so much?" I stood, crossing the room to stand in front of him. "Because they're your family, and family can break your heart worse than anyone." He let out a shaky breath, and then, without warning, he closed the distance between us. His lips met mine, tentative at first, then desperate, like he was trying to anchor himself to something real. I kissed him back, my hands finding his face, his hair, pulling him closer until there was no space left between us. When we finally pulled apart, he was trembling, but he didn't look away. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered, "but I want to try. With you." I smiled, my heart so full of hurt. "Then we'll figure out together." The next few days were a whirlwind. Jasper decided to visit his mother, but not alone. I was going with him. We took a bus to Georgia, the hours stretching out in a blur of highways and rest stops. Jasper was quiet, his notebook open in his lap, but he didn't write. Instead, he held my hand, his grip tight, like he was afraid I'd disappear. When we reached his hometown, it was like stepping into a different world. The air was thick with humidity, the streets lined with oak trees and houses that looked like they hadn't changed in decades. Jasper's childhood home was a modest ranch-style house, its paint peeling, the porch sagging under the weight of memory. His mother, Ellen, was frail, her face lined with pain and regret. She didn't say much when she saw Jasper, just reached for his hand and held it like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Caleb was there too, watching us with a mix of suspicion and resignation. "I'm sorry," Ellen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Jasper nodded, but I could see the conflict in his eyes, love and hurt tangled together, impossible to unravel. "I'm here now," he said. "That's what matters." We stayed for 2 days, helping around the house, talking in quiet moments. Ellen didn't ask about me, but I saw the way she looked at us, like she was trying to understand something she'd never been taught. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Back in Brooklyn, something shifted. Jasper was still himself, funny, thoughtful, a little guarded, but there was a new lightness to him, like he'd let go of something heavy. He started writing again, filling his notebook with stories that felt alive, vibrant, like they were pieces of him finally set free. One night, as we sat on my fire escape, the city sprawling out below us, he turned to me. "I want to stay," he said. "Here with you. For real." My heart stopped, then started again, faster. "You sure?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded, his hand finding mine. "I've spent my whole life running. I'm done. I want to build something real. With you." I kissed him then, under the glow of the city lights, and it felt like a promise. Not just to each other, but to ourselves, to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep loving even when it was hard. But life, as always, had other plans. A week later, Jasper got a call from Caleb. Their mother had taken a turn for the worse, and he needed to go back. "Come with me," he asked, his voice small but hopeful. I didn't hesitate. Of course. The second trip to Georgia was harder. Ellen was in the hospital now, her condition fragile. Jasper spent hours at her bedside, reading to her from his notebook, his voice steady even as his hands shook. I stayed close, helping where I could, but mostly just being there, a quiet anchor in the storm. One night, as we sat in the hospital waiting room, Jasper leaned his head on my shoulder. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said. "You'd figure out," I said, but I squeezed his hand, letting him know I wasn't going anywhere. Ellen passed away the next morning. Jasper didn't cry, not then. He just sat there, holding her hand, his face blank, but his eyes full of everything he couldn't say. Caleb, for once, didn't argue or judge. He just hugged his brother, a silent acknowledgement that some things were bigger than their differences. We stayed for the funeral, a small affair in a church that felt too big for the handful of people there. Jasper spoke, his voice clear and strong, telling stories about his mother that made everyone laugh and cry. I watched him, proud and heartbroken, knowing this was a moment he'd carry forever. Back in Brooklyn, life settled into a new rhythm. Jasper moved in with me, his few belongings fitting easily into my tiny apartment. We turned my living room into a shared studio, his notebooks stacked next to my sketch pads, our dreams tangled together like the city lights outside. But it wasn't all easy. Jasper still carried the weight of his past, the scars of a family that hadn't known how to love him fully. And I had my own doubts, my own fears about whether I could be enough for someone who'd been through so much. But every night, when we lay together, his head on my chest, I knew we were building something worth fighting for. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Jasper handed me a new story. It was different this time, not a fantasy, but a love story about two people who found each other in the chaos of a city, who chose each other despite the odds. I read it, my eyes blurring with tears, and when I looked up, he was watching me. "It's us," he said simply. I set the story down and pulled him close, kissing him like it was the first time. "It's perfect," I said. Months later, we stood together at a small gallery in Bushwick when my sketches were on display for the first time. Jasper had helped me pick the pieces, his belief in me stronger than my own. In the corner, a table held copies of his first published story, the one he'd written about us, now printed in a local literary magazine. The room was full of people, friends from the community center, strangers who'd wandered in, even Caleb, who'd come up from Georgia, his presence a quiet olive branch. Jasper stood beside me, his hand in mine, and I felt it, the weight of everything we'd been through and the lightness of everything we still had ahead. "Elias," he said, his voice low so only I could hear. "Thank you for letting me in." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for knocking." And as the gallery buzzed around us, I knew this was our story, not perfect, not easy, but ours. A story of two people who found each other at a door, in a city, in a moment, and chose to build a life together, one brave step at a time.